Good evening, or depending where you are, hi to you all. We are a big community on Zoom here, and also people are following on the live stream on YouTube. I'm going to give a short introduction, and I'm going to explain you what we're going to do before I introduce Daniel to you. So we, the organizers, Xenia, Catherine, and of course we have also Anne and Neil, and we have Joris and Ingrid, and more people belong to Rethinking Economics Antwerp and Imagine Life. We have different communities here. We have a ULab community who joined. We have Rethinking people from different parts of the world who are joining. And Rethinking Economics Antwerp, we started actually in October in 2020 with a series about rethinking economics for a thriving society. And the specific goal that we've set for ourselves as Rethinking Economics people is to inspire and shine light on the thriving and on thrivability. And also the link, of course, how we want to rethink economics in order to get there. So far, we had different guests. The first guest we had was Michelle Holliday, the author of the book, The Age of Thrivability. And that recording is available on the Rethinking Economics Antwerp YouTube page. We had a second session with Kees Klomp and Chita Osterwal, the two people who are working on a book called Thrive, in which Daniel also has a publication, and also Michelle Holliday and Kate Rayworth and quite a few other people. The book will be published hopefully or coming out in March. And then today, thanks to Anne and Neil who are here, we have Daniel who joins us for the third session on this thriving society and how to get there. I'm gonna stop sharing the screen because I want to have Daniel in full. I don't know if you can do that, Xenia. And my first question that I'm going to ask to Daniel is, tell us about who you are, a bit about your journey, your passion, and what, according to you, is most relevant for us to know now in this setting this evening. So the floor is yours, Daniel. We're listening to your introduction.
Who am I? Makes me think of Gregory Bateson, who apparently at some point said that on some days he catches himself actually believing that he is such a thing as a separate self. So if you're asking me from that perspective of who am I as an individual rather than who am I as an expression of this wonderful planet and life thriving and continuing into the future, then yeah, I'm originally German. I've lived in lots of different places, spent a long time in Scotland, a few years at the Findhorn Eco Village. And now for the last 10 years, I've been living on the island of Mallorca. I'm originally a biologist who got disheartened with the overly quantitative focus in science, where only what is statistically significant can be talked about. And that just didn't feel right to me. I went into biology because I wanted to understand life. I wanted to understand how life creates conditions conducive to life, and much more in the tradition of the old naturalists like Humboldt or Goethe. And then did a master's in holistic science at Schumacher College a few years later, because they were addressing all my problems with science. And they discovered that design is really the way that our worldviews and organizing ideas and the stories we tell are turned into action. And so ended up doing a PhD on design for human and planetary health in 2006. And then 10 years later wrote this book, Designing Regenerative Cultures. And basically for the last 20 years, I've been trying to understand how we can redesign the human impact on Earth within the lifetime of the generations alive today in such a way that the human species has a future and that all other species have a future. For me, as a biologist, I find it really difficult to, as a daily practice, remember that over 150 species disappear forever, every day, and that is due to our actions. And so I try to do my bit that this will not continue forever, that we'll find a
Wow.
different way.
Yeah. So I guess that being a biologist, of course, you put life at the center. And then if you hear about, or if we all listen about the loss of biodiversity now, the fifth extinction they're talking about, that's indeed, it's dramatic. So if we look at the Rethinking Economics and why it was created by students and actually professors and teachers, because they were complaining about what you called also the quantifying of everything, the monetarizing of everything. And they were actually claiming we need to do things differently. We need pluralism in our education. And we need alternatives being taught in schools and in universities. What, according to you, is the main issue, the main challenge, the main problem with our current story that is being told to us?
Well, I mean, maybe start with the word economics. I mean, many of you will have heard this before, but I find it really striking that on the one hand, economics and ecology have the same root. And economics is about managing the household, and ecology is about understanding the household. But how can you manage a household you don't understand? And most economists don't understand ecology at all. That's why we're in this mess. But you can also, and then I'm reminded of one of my mentors, Satish Kumar, who was one of the founders of Schumacher College.
Mm-hmm.
He just recently published a wonderful provocation, as he always finds this the right place to put his acupuncture needle. And his article was called "We Need a London School of Ecology and Economics." That's precisely what I'm getting at. But if you go further upstream in terms of what's wrong with the current story, it's in my book, I build on the work of Thomas Berry and Thich Nhat Hanh and also Charles Eisenstein, using this notion of interbeing as where we're going, and the story of separation as why we're in this mess. This false belief that I was sort of alluding to with the mention of Gregory Bateson earlier, that it is actually possible to be separate from the rest of the world, that there's this false understanding that we somehow as human beings can live outside of nature, that culture is anywhere different from nature, rather than understanding that nature is the larger process. Nature is what brings us forth, and that being can only happen in relationship. We bring forth this world and each other through relating. And if we remember that, then we pay more attention to relationships, both ecological and social relationships, and understand that life always exists in this tension, this polarity between being for oneself and being as part of a larger whole. But the being is in the center of it. It's all both at the same time. We all are individuals and expressions of this living planet. And once we get back to understanding that, which is what our indigenous elders all around the world have handed carefully from one generation to another, and that's why our species managed to live as long as it has lived. And in the last 250 years, we've completely lost this wisdom. And if we don't find it soon, then we're in trouble. And the sad thing is that it's actually a very small proportion of us who caused this mess, and everybody else has to suffer it.
But you pointed out correctly the London School of Economics and Ecology, it should be called, but it isn't. What do you believe is the impact of the current dominant economic paradigm on our planet and our ecosystems? You've said it to some extent, but
well, I mean, we have this ridiculous because we have economists that don't understand ecology. In ecology or in biology, everything that grows according to the logistics curve. It goes up and then it levels out. And economists say, oh, up is nice, let's keep going.
They
and
are
and that doesn't work.
yeah, they want to grow, so the growth paradigm. So
And again,
eternal growth.
it's this coming back to this focus on quantities and this completely mistaken measure of success that we call gross domestic product, and trying to, like, it's inbuilt. If an economy doesn't grow at 3% per annum, you're in recession and things go bad. And so we actually have an inbuilt growth imperative in the current economic system. And any conversation about how do we create a sustainable future, how do we create regenerative cultures without addressing this structural dysfunctionality, this structural violence in the system, will be in vain. So there's a lot, economists have a lot to answer for.
If you look at the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, their goal number 8 says economic growth.
Yeah, it's, so, I mean, what's his name? Gemeinwohlökonomie. Christian Felber has called it the Trojan. He's called it the Trojan horse in the SDGs. It's the one spanner in the works that will basically derail the implementation of all the other goals. And but I should say that because I'm a biologist, maybe I don't really like bedeviling the word growth altogether. I don't necessarily think that the conversation around post-growth or degrowth or all of that is necessarily the right framing, because we do want growth. We want growth in healthy human relationships, in community cohesion, in topsoil, in the qualities of the water quality of our rivers, in the amount of forests around the globe. All of that growth is positive growth, but it's qualitative growth. And again, coming back to the logistics curve, like if you take it into your own body, we all had that experience of having a period of rapid growth. I have a little daughter. It's amazing how they grow in the first 3 years. It's just unbelievable. And then I also have a niece who's now going through the teenage years, and my brother called me up and she's grown 2 centimeters in the last week. So there's this other growth spurt that happens before we then stop growing in terms of quantitative growth height. But then the real journey starts. Then you have your whole lifetime growing qualitatively in experience, in relationships, in so many other ways. And really, that's what I think we're challenged to do now. We have to understand that we can't grow quantitatively indefinitely. And now it's about qualitative growth and also about readdressing these obscene inequalities in the current global economic system and national economic systems. I mean, I just yesterday gave a talk to a group of people, and so I've got the numbers roughly on the top of my head. The 2019 Global Wealth Report by Credit Suisse says that about 86% of the global wealth are owned by just about a little bit more than 10% of humanity. And then at the same time, 56% of humanity only share 1.8% of the wealth.
Yeah, the inequality is increasing.
It's absolutely impossible to build a sustainable system on that kind of obscene inequality, and we wouldn't want to sustain a system that is that obscenely unequal anyway. And so there's a real challenge of redistribution and doing things differently now.
Moving from a quantitative point of view to a qualitative point of view, instead of more, better, and deepening and maturing.
For those who haven't come across this, if you Google qualitative growth and the name Hazel Henderson and Fritjof Capra, they actually wrote a short paper for some kind of bizarre occasion of the British Society of Accountants paid them for it or whatever. But if you put qualitative growth, Capra, Henderson, PDF, it'll pop up. And it's a really, really good piece of work.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. We may put it also in the chat box for those, and then afterwards you can listen to the recording if you missed it. I like to use the opportunity to introduce you also the fact that we are calling these sessions drivability. What does drivability as a term mean for you when you hear it?
Well, it's one of those words with anything that with an ability behind it is kind of easy, because it's the ability to thrive, isn't it? Like life thrives. That's its natural state. It tries to be exuberant and abundant. There is nature, unlike the false, misunderstood Darwinism that we're taught and that economists love to excuse the story of the elbows with, that we're competing in a world with scarce resources, and therefore that story creates competitive scarcity. If we actually pay attention to how life has evolved and how it has complexified over 3.8 billion years, we can see that life creates conditions conducive to life. Life makes the planet more inhabitable for more life. It gardens. It's an ecosystem engineer in the sense that it makes ecosystem even more diverse, more bioproductive. And so it's a shift from this competitive scarcity that is entirely based on a false story to collaborative abundance, to understanding that as life, we can create conditions conducive to life, and we just have to fall into the right patterns of the rest of the community of life. And for me, that's at the heart of what thriving is all about. And there's actually a nice story that, like in 2010, a woman who lives in California called Jean Russell put together a beautiful project where she, with a group of people, that they sat in a room and said, okay, what's this notion of thrivability? Let's just do a word cloud. And people put up their post-its, and so they ended up with about 50 or 60 terms that they then put in a spreadsheet, and then they reached out to their network and said, we're going to do this collaborative sketchbook, pick a term and write no more than one page on thrivability. And when my friend Samantha Sweetwater invited me into this process, it's through her that I knew about it. Quite a few of the terms were already taken, but one that wasn't taken yet was one of my favorite words, which is integrity. So I put in the chat the link to a slide share of that thrivability sketchbook. That's when in 2010 we tried to map out what thrivability means.
I'm going to use the opportunity for the listeners. If you want, feel free. What do you think is thrivability? What does it mean for you? So you can put it already in the chat box. So what does thrivability mean for you? So we're going to add a bit on the slides you've been sharing with us. I guess you are familiar with Rutger Bregman, the journalist for The Correspondent, who also published a book where he says that indeed a lot of the studies that we're competitive, etc., is wrong. We're actually a cooperative species. I think you would agree with him then that indeed.
I often like to compare it with an image of, if you stand by the ocean and you watch the waves, it's very easy to not see the ocean for the waves, because the waves are loud, they call your attention, they're crashing against the pier and they're spraying all over the place. And yes, competition exists. We've all seen it around us. We've all been on the receiving end of competitive behavior. But it's literally the waves on top of the ocean. The vast depth of the ocean, all the way down into the Marianas Trench, is a sea of symbiosis and collaboration. And on top, we get this little bit of fine-tuning that is competition. So it's not a kind of either or, it's a both and. But I mean, David Sloan Wilson says that competitive individuals will outcompete collaborative individuals, but collaborative groups will outcompete competitive groups. And that's the whole idea of multi-level selection. He's really trying to still stick with Darwin's story. I personally think that it's even more nuanced than that. But yeah, like the reality is that yeah, another image that I always bring to people's minds when they say, oh, no, look at the world, it's so competitive. If you think of a city like Antwerp, and if you think of all the interactions that happen in a day, the fact that you can drive on one side of the road and you don't have to be worried that the person on the other side of the road is just going to start driving straight at you and drive into you. That we've created so many collaborative rules to make life possible. There are many more examples of people helping older people across the street or pulling a child back from the street when it's just about to be run over, compared to the few fist fights and maybe the one stabbing that you get a day in a big city. It's a question of proportions, but our media only report the bad things, and our storytelling every evening. Like I don't know if it's the same in Belgium or in the Netherlands, but not that my mom's been for a while. If you watch German TV, that it's all crime series. It's like every evening it's about somebody getting killed and finding the killer. It's just, yeah,
it's not about life. I see some of beautiful explanations. Thrivability to me means living beyond survival and within the conditions that enable us to live our fullest potential in harmony with nature. I think that's a very nice one. And then you have other people. Regenerative, we're going to come to that in a minute. Regenerative economics is the restoration of intelligent and wise management of our global planetary ecosystems, whilst reigniting a spiritual renewal or development growth stage of the human species.
I would caution with the word in harmony with nature, learning from nature. The linguistic framing of that is still othering nature. In harmony as nature is getting more to the point.
Okay, that's a very good remark. I would like to make, and then you will be, also the audience will be asked to ask questions to you in a minute. I still want to build up a bit and the experience and have you share the experience of all your writing and things you've been publishing. I think the latest book, and I know there is a new one coming, maybe you can tell a bit about that later, but you're really well known for designing regenerative cultures, in which you write, regenerative cultures are about thriving together. So the word regeneration, I think for you is very essential. What does it mean, in your words, regeneration?
For me, it describes the core activity by which life creates conditions conducive to life. It is an evolutionary and a developmental term. I think one of the other framing mistakes we make when we talk about the future and envision a more beautiful future, a thriving future, regenerative future, a flourishing future, we very quickly think of that future as a place in which we will arrive. And we think of our strategies of how to create it as if we're building a building that will one day be finished. And that notion that we will ever arrive is, I think, one of the problems. I think we will journey much wiser if we understand that this is a journey and it will never end, because life, as Alfred North Whitehead says, is in a continuous exploration of novelty. It will continue to transform. And because it's a nested wholeness where things sit in each other and are connected, it means that even if there's a certain stagnation on one level, the context changes, and therefore it doesn't fit anymore. Even if it was beautifully designed and all thriving and wonderful, if the context changes, eventually it doesn't fit anymore. So if we actually begin to understand that we are journeyers and that we will never arrive, that's why in my book, I make this sort of epistemological aikido of saying, let's not talk about solutions and answers. Let's pay attention to the questions. The solution and the answers, we need to put them forward. We need to experiment at the right scale so feedback is quick, but we need to hold them lightly and understand that solution and answers are transitory means to ask better questions. And we as a culture right now think that questions are transitory means to come to answers. And then we spend time arguing over who got the better answer and the better solution. And once somebody's got sort of celebrated for their solution, they will try to keep it entrenched because that was their moment of glory, instead of saying, well, I did my bit, pushed our story a little bit further, and now there will be a new solution. And the minute you put the questions into the center and not the answers, you have a way of holding the diversity that we're currently see clashing on so many levels in society. This polarization of society is because we think we need to be right. But if we understand that we can live the questions together and that we keep having to explore new ways of doing things, then we can hold the requisite variety in the system that it actually needs in order to be adaptable and transformable and evolutionary. And the regeneration term is basically about the capacity of people in place to keep learning, evolving, responding to change, and manifesting the unique potential that is in each and every one of us as an expression of that nested wholeness. We all came here with a job, and we need to find our essence of how can we best contribute? How can we be of service? The only way that we can express our individual uniqueness in a regenerative way is in service to the proximate whole, in service to community, to ecosystem, to planet. And then we can find, like, we can manifest the potential in the polarity that is being for oneself and being as part of a larger whole, rather than have the two constantly clash. It's not about moving from ego to eco. It's about a healthy expression of self, ego, and in a context of a healthy expression and a healing of the eco. And that's in service to life. Seva, the ancient Indian term of seva, has been trying to communicate that to us for a few thousand years.
Wow. And if we look back, there is a kind, because I look at the same time at questions or remarks that are made in the chat box. Where does history fall into this? Because my next question would be, how do you think we can move towards this more regenerative culture, which apparently is not yet the case today? So what are the steps we can take, should take, each of us, in order to move to that more regenerative culture?
Nenad Malkovich, who's started this Facebook group, the Re-Economy Thinkers or something, he, when I first connected with him, he reminded me, like in many ways, the way I sketch it out in my book, I bring together lots of different expressions of what I would call regenerative cultural expressions. So transition towns, eco-villages, peer-to-peer movement, the right type of circular economy, solidarity economy. I can't name them all, it would take too long. So these are people trying to already, in certain areas, give real examples of how we can move towards collaborative abundance from competitive scarcity. And
design-based approach seems to be a key message you want to give to us, or
yeah, for me that was a big aha when I was studying holistic science in 2001, 2002, of how design is how we put intentionality into action, and that design is not the beautification of material objects, as I thought before, that only designers do design. No, we all do design. Design is the core of problem-solving activity or potential unleashing activity. But in the title, Designing Regenerative Cultures, is a paradox, because cultures don't get designed. They emerge out of the sum total of all the relationships and interactions of the people in place together. And so when you ask, how do we create regenerative cultures, the best I can come up with is it's a place-sourced and place-based process of living the questions together, of going onto that journey of how do we heal this place? How can whatever we do here be in service to a larger whole that then nourishes us and enables future generations to have a more abundant, richer, more diverse environment and context than we have right now? And that's the journey that we have to do now in every place around the planet. Bill Reed, another elder of the regeneration movement, at the beginning of last year pointed out to me, Daniel, you can't save the planet, you can only save places. And that's a really insightful statement. Also, particularly when you understand that place is fractal, meaning you can only unfold your true potential and your full agency in the context of community and a local ecosystem, the place you're in. But because that place is nested in a bioregion and as part of a living planet, the only way you can heal the planet is to start where you are with the people that are around you and start that journey. And if we all do that, then that's why there's a plural in designing regenerative cultures. Then there is no one regenerative cultures. There is no how do we define it and then scale it up and make everybody do the same thing. No, we need to celebrate our abundance, and we need to celebrate this biocultural uniqueness of place and give it a new expression in each place.
I want to come back on your importance of the place, the location. You've said we need to live the questions. What are for you the key questions we should ask ourselves to move towards thrivability and regenerative culture?
Well, one question that really floored me when somebody asked it to me for the first time was, I had the good fortune of meeting a guy called David Orr, who's one of America's foremost environmental educators, while I was at Schumacher College. And then years later, when I finished my PhD, I needed an external examiner who really had a holistic, synthetic mind and who wasn't going to kind of shoot me down as a PhD candidate for having written 750 pages of PhD thesis, 300,000 words. The academic in you is going, what?
Wow, yes.
Yeah,
that's a lot.
It was only possible because at the time, PhDs in design were still new and they didn't have a cap officially yet at my university. Otherwise, like now they've made sure that doesn't ever happen again.
200.
Anyway, so David was my external examiner, and then afterwards I went to visit him at Oberlin College in the States. And I remember interviewing him, and the interview is on YouTube if anybody's interested. And I asked him, David, what is the dimension of spirituality and the sacred in the transition we now need to make? And he gave a wonderful answer, which I won't go into all the detail about yet now, but he then came around to this point where he said, before we can answer the question what we need to do and how we might do it to create a sustainable human presence on Earth, we need to ask ourselves a much more difficult question. And that is, why are we worth sustaining? What is it about human beings that makes us worth it, worthy of continuing? And I think there are hundreds of answers to this question, but we need to ask that question because from that space of the deeper meaning of why we are worth it, and particularly in answering that question, we will understand that it's all about relationship. It's all about creative expression, about our ability to mirror the universe back to itself, to be the conscious reflective species that can actually appreciate this abundance and this beauty. Then we will find the right ways and the right answers to create a thriving and regenerative future.
I really like that question. So why are we as human species worth it being sustained on this planet?
Mm-hmm. And there are 250 questions in my book. So if you want more questions, and then I wrote these SDG implementation flashcards and added another 200 questions.
So leaving the questions really means something for you. Coming back on place, and in the meantime, I see, and I try to check also the chat box, so I will come back to these questions in a minute. You talk about bioregionality. Why are place, you already explained that, and our relationship to place so important?
Because again, like as a biologist and ecologist and studying complexity theory, holistic science, having had the amazing opportunity to actually be with Jim Lovelock for a few days and learn about Gaia theory from him directly, and working with one of his closest collaborators, Stephen Harding at Schumacher College for 18 months, I began to really understand some of the patterns by which life creates conditions conducive to life. And this notion of nested wholeness isn't just some kind of intellectual fancy. That's how life is structured, from the cellular to the planetary. And we have completely fallen out of appropriate relationship with that nested wholeness. We are out of scale. Our society doesn't fit. Its systems of production and consumption are global, moving things all over the place. And this is not how life produces. And so we need to refit our human patterns in a regenerative, healing way into these patterns that sustain life. What Heraclitus called the hidden connections are the strongest. Like these hidden connections of understanding how healing places, healing ecosystem heals the planet, and how if we like the early, like Netherlands is one of the, and I know you're not in the Netherlands.
Very good.
I'm learning. But there's a lot of talk about the circular economy these days, and the Ellen MacArthur Foundation has done a wonderful job in getting it out there and getting industry talking about it. But it's the third reframe of an old idea, and the second one was Bill McDonough and Michael Braungardt's Cradle to Cradle.
Cradle to Cradle.
And the first one was Allenby's and those guys, they called it industrial ecology. But the most essentialized knowledge of understanding how we might create a different system of production and consumption as human beings that might fit into the scales of nature comes from these early industrial ecologists. And they clearly pointed out that yes, we need to close the loops, but the scale at which we close the loops is critically important. And in schmoozing up to large corporations, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation has dropped that important insight a little bit out of sight. We need to create circular flows at the, like I spent years, more than a decade, thinking that it's all about sustainable community design. I worked with the Global Eco Village Network, and then I worked with Transition Towns, and I realized living at Findhorn that you can't create a sustainable community unless you create it in the context of trying to transform the entire bioregion and create a collaborative networks of communities in that bioregion that then, because there is something about economics of scale. Certain things need a slightly larger scale so you can produce them in a sensible way, but they don't need a global scale. And so the bioregional idea is part of like one of the early notions of first of all, again, like with all of this stuff, it's kind of important these days, even more so, to highlight that none of this is new, that indigenous people have been telling us this for time in memoriam, but we had the arrogance, just because we invented a bit of science and a bit of blingy technologies that allowed us to kill people, we had the arrogance of calling these people primitive and thought they didn't have anything to teach us. And we as a species were a bioregional species for most of our species history, and we will not be around as a species for very long if we don't go into a process of re-inhabitation, as Gary Snyder, the poet in America, called it. It's we have to come back home to place. We have to come back home to region. We have to, like this wonderful map by Robert Zooks, where he's highlighted all the world's river systems in different colors. That's a biophysical map. That's a real map. That's reality of this living planet. The maps that we've got with the straight lines that were drawn by the ruler of a ruler are not at all in line with how life creates conditions conducive to life. They are structures of the era of power over, the era of empires. And we, if we want it or not, we have moved into the planetary era now. And we need to refit our patterns to real ecological and biophysical patterns. And they happen to be river systems, bioregions. And again, don't get hung up on, well, how do I define what bioregion do I live in and where do I draw the boundary? In nature, boundaries are always points of interconnection and exchange. They're not points of separation. They're not anything like the stupid boundaries that we have at borders. And so it doesn't matter if your bioregion semi-overlaps with the next bioregion. Actually, that creates vitality, because at the edge where two regions meet, two ecosystems meet, that's where innovation and diversity happens.
There's a question of Dave Pendle where he uses the word you used, integrity and nested wholeness. Mm-hmm. He asks you if you can expand your thoughts on how nested wholeness relates to integrity.
Well, integrity is, I mean, like Bucky Fuller was much more eloquent on integrity than I could ever be. But to me, nested wholeness describes this kind of what Arthur Koestler called a holarchy, where a part is both separate, but like, again, it's what I said earlier, this living for oneself and living as part of a larger whole, where you're constantly nested in a life-sustaining system, like the way that cells sit in an organ, organs make up a body, if a body sits in a family, a community, a bioregion, an ecosystem, and the planetary biosphere. And integrity for me is to be in right relationship with that nested wholeness, to understand how we create, how I can maintain my own health and individuality by serving the health of the larger system that I'm part of, and paying attention to the health of the component systems down the holarchy, my cells, my organs. That's what gives us health. But then, of course, we also know that the planetary health is negative. Like if you start deteriorating ecosystems and planetary health, then human health goes out of the window. And the pandemic is the perfect example of it, because zoonotic diseases spread when ecosystems are basically deteriorating because of loss of biodiversity and an encroachment by too many human beings in the wrong places.
I would like to ask your opinion on a book written by Kate, The Donut Economics, where actually also recently she moved to a city approach, like working together with the city of Rotterdam. Now she also will work together with the city of Brussels. So trying to implement her idea of the donut with environmental ceiling and a social basement. Do you think that helps for economists then to get into the right way?
Absolutely, because it's a way of re-regionalizing and localizing economics. Actually, the first time Kate publicly shared the initial prototypes of the Thriving Places methodology that she developed with the funding of the C40 network, which is a cities network. And she did the work in Amsterdam, and I think it was Portland, Oregon, and Pittsburgh, a couple of workshops. And in the initial version, Janine Benyus also contributed to the design of the methodology. And Kate, in Rotterdam at the Reporting 3.0 conference, presented a sort of snippet of that, and then asked me afterwards whether I'd have lunch with her and kind of make comments and possibly critique or add or whatever you want to call it. And the one thing that I would say is the Achilles tendon of that approach is, because it was funded by the cities networks, it's a little bit city-centric. Like, I know that in the implementation of it, they actually do have a conversation about how does the city sit in the region. But Patrick Geddes wrote a book in 1910 called Cities in Evolution. And he is also one of the founding fathers of town planning and sociology. He was a biologist who was at least 100 years ahead of his time. And he has this thing called the valley section that describes how you have to plan cities within the context of their region, from the mountaintops down to where the river meets the sea. Again, a kind of watershed approach. The city needs to be planned in such a way that it pays attention to a multiple, like he invented the concept of overlaying maps that then McHarg developed further, and then eventually it turned into GIS mapping, the Geographic Information System mapping. I would hope that Kate can tweak this work with the cities in a way that she foregrounds the regions more. I would venture to guess that the reason why it's city focused is that it's easier to get a city government to engage with this, and it's easier to fund it in a planet where we like to tell the story that the future is the future of cities. Again, if we don't revisit that story, we are going to have a Trump type scenario in all other places. The reason why Trump could come in was because the Americans foregrounded the cities for too many decades, leaving the hinterland literally being in hinterland. And that created this vast divide that then bred the kind of redneck support for an idiot like Trump. And we have a tendency of doing the same thing in Europe now, of not paying enough attention to our rural communities. So if we want to create thriving economies, I love Kate's work, and I love Kate's energy and everything she does. And the Donut Economics Action Lab is a gift to the world. And I would wish that
as long as
we put it into a bioregional context rather than a too city-focused context.
That's very clear. I have like for another 5 to 10 minutes my questions, and then we're going to listen into the questions of the audience. I would like to focus on where Rethinking Economics started with, which is actually education. What could be the role of education, in your opinion, to move towards regenerative cultures?
I'm just answering one question. Hold on a sec.
Yeah, the book of 1920. Yeah.
No, it's actually 1910. If I can correct, and it's Patrick.
Cities in Evolution, 1910. Okay.
So
regarding education, what could be the role of education? Everything, not only universities or PhDs, but perhaps from.
Thank you for that addition, because basically education is, again, like just as I said, let's kind of watch out when we create conversations around the future that propose some form of arriving at some form of ideal state. Similarly, let's watch out talking about education as if it's a process that you just do, and then you're done with it, and then you get on with life. You live and you learn, otherwise you don't live very long, as somebody once said. And education needs to be lifelong learning. It needs to, now that we live in such a complex dynamic system with so many of us, with so many different conflicting issues, we need to continue learning. And that's at the notion, at the heart of the notion of regeneration, is also to continue learning, to continue living the questions. And so education is vital. That's why for most of my professional life, despite the fact that it's deeply underpaid, I've paid a lot of attention to being an educator, because to me, education is the highest leverage point of intervention in the system. If you can change the organizing ideas in people's minds, then all sorts of wonderful things can come from that, from those people. You can't predict and control what they're going to do with what you teach them, but if you give them certain organizing ideas, they're more likely to help the emergence of healthier more regenerative systems. And so for me, again, through this process of re-inhabitation, through revisiting the Humpty Dumpty of our siloed academic discipline world, where like the British nursery rhyme, Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall, Humpty Dumpty had a great fall, all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty Dumpty back together again. I believe that's about education. I believe that's about what when we started to specialize into different disciplines, we lost the perspective of how they all come together. And the only way that we can meaningfully, without throwing out the baby with the bathwater, celebrating the wealth of detailed knowledge that we've discovered in all of those disciplines that are meaningful to only the people who are very deep down in their silos and have a little global community that publishes obscure paper journals that nobody reads. To bring them out of those silos again, we have to have conversations of how is all this knowledge meaningful to this bioregion and everybody and all beings in this bioregion. And then we need to apply chemistry and geology and history and physics and sociology onto the uniqueness of our bioregion. And then we can really transform. And by doing so, in terms of, and this needs the artists and the cultural institutions to come on board. I mentioned Geddes. Geddes had this wonderful idea in the early 1900s, where if you go to the city of Edinburgh, just outside Edinburgh Castle is the Outlook Tower, Ramsay Gardens. And it's a building that you, back then in Geddes's times, you could walk into it at the ground floor and you had an exhibition of the world. And then you walked up one floor and it was an exhibition of Europe, and then another floor and an exhibition of the UK, and then another of Scotland. And then the top floor was an exhibition of Scotland, and it was also a camera obscura, high tech of the time, where people could look at the ceiling and see the whole city reflected through a mirror system. And this is a cultural, educational institution, a museum that implants nested wholeness and understanding of how do I live in place in relationship to an entire planet as a coal miner coming into Edinburgh on a Sunday visit. And it's that kind of education that we need. And that's where all forms of cultural expressions are called into showing up for the regeneration rising, for reframing our relationship to place and bioregion.
If I look at how universities organize these days, it's not like what you're saying. It's more separate of everything which is around it. Even the city, there's very little connection between activities going on in the university and what's happening around it. Yeah, so you would integrate it a lot more.
The ivory towers will fall. They are completely irrelevant in this world. And there's already so much wonderful education that has been developed over 20, 30, 40 years that is outside of this conventional learning of universities. And there's the beginning of the joining up of that mycelial network into a more coordinated alternative where people can basically earn credits as they piece together their own degrees, really doing work meaningfully in practice. And once that organizational structure is in place, and I think it's going to be another few years and it's there, then universities will find that people say, why should I spend all that money in 4 years in order to learn something? The way that the whole accreditation process in universities works means that by the time a degree is actually taught, it's already 3 years old. By the time the first students come out of it, it's 7 years old and somewhat out of date already. We need like that. I hate Singularity University because they have a techno-optimist view that is really out of this world and somewhat distasteful to my mind. But the one thing I liked about when the Diamandis was interviewed about Singularity University and they asked him about the curriculum, he said, we don't have a curriculum. It changes every session. we're moving too fast to fix it in a curriculum. And that was the only good thing the man has ever said. But
I have one last question, and then we're going to ask the audience, which is a difficult question for me, because at the moment you have economic studies. You can study to become an economist. And then my question would be, what should we teach these students? But if I hear you, then you would say, well, they have to be able to study different things, and not only everything which is written about the economy. So should we teach our economic students, or students in general?
Teach them about the household and how to manage the household. Be true to what you set out to do in the first place. Work on making people build deep relationships to place, and understanding that the most enlightened way to serve your self-interest is to serve the larger context that you're embedded in. And challenge them to create the alternatives in terms of, like, there's a wonderful little graphic that I got permission to reproduce in my book by Ethan Miller about the solidarity economy and the different aspects of how to create just mediums of exchange and sharing that happen at a scale where people still have a face and live and share a place and hold shared responsibility for that place in common. And so there's a lot of activity there that we currently don't put economic value to, but that creates human relationships. And what I believe we will find more and more as we're moving into these turbulent decades of the next 2 or 3 decades of climate change adaptation, hopefully eventually reversal if we make the right choices. Money isn't going to save us. It's relationships, understanding your place, knowing your neighbors, knowing how to hold diversity, how to be in disagreement and still find common ground to move forward together, even if there are many points that you're not necessarily in agreement with. All those capacities are vital. And I think a new form of economic education is, how do we manage this household together, but not as masters of and owners of. Like, I think the core, again, coming back to indigenous wisdom, all indigenous people hold one core belief in common, which is the land does not belong to us, we belong to the land. Sounds a bit hippie, but if you really sit with that long enough, if you can create an economic system that understands that we belong to the land, that we are obliged, that this is what's giving us life, and that the primary value creator of any economy is bioproductivity. We dismiss our farmers, but the farmers are the ecosystem's tendants, the caretakers, the custodians, and we need to go back to healing our soils and healing our ecosystems. We've denuded half of the forests around the planet we've cut down in the last 5,000 years. Let's see if in only 50 years we can bring those forests back. That's value creation.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I was supposed to ask the audience now to 2 questions, but I'm not going to ask them. Just my questions for the audience were, what are assumptions and ideas in our current way of teaching economics that no longer serve us, according to you? I'm still going to ask it. So so not to you, but to the audience. What are assumptions and ideas in our current way of teaching economics that no longer serve us, according to you? Can even share the screen and the question. So just interested in what you're going to answer on that question. So I'm moving and I'm going to share the question if it works. So what are assumptions and ideas in our current economic thinking that no longer serve us, according to you, the audience now, after having listened to the explanation of Daniel? So please use the chat box to give your answers. It's because we're leaving the question here. So but still I'm asking for answers. So profit as an end rather than as a means.
Well, even profit, is it still profit, or is it creating collaborative abundance, creating surplus, creating, ensuring that the system is more diverse, more bioproductive, more able to regenerate itself when we've met our needs from it than before we met our needs from it.
Yeah, I continue reading some other things. The idea that competition brings innovation improvement, we should leave behind us. Scarcity-based thinking, we should leave behind us. Overly extractive processes, we should leave behind us. Ceding power. That we can grow indefinitely. From YouTube, what we should leave behind us. Cost price, ownership, we should leave behind us. That's an interesting one. Daniel, maybe you want to comment? Ownership, because you were talking about the natives' wisdom that we don't own the land, but...
Well, I was trying to post something, but it's not working. Sorry, hold on a sec.
So monoculture in monosystems we should leave behind us. And Daniel,
I shared a link to a subchapter from my book in which there's a bullet point list at the end about some of the faults in the current economic and monetary system that serve my answer to this. But yeah, I mean, it's an interesting, again, is all private property inappropriate? Maybe not. Maybe it enables a deeper relationship of caretaking when somebody is actually the custodian of something. But it's finding a different relationship with ownership, and also understanding that we can't all live in abundance if we all want our individual copy of everything. But if we create for some things, and it's like these things are always, and this is the big problem now that we're beginning to see how inappropriately the fit is between the systems we've created and how life creates conditions conducive to life. Humanity has this tendency of doing the wrong things for so long until all the negative effects are starting to mount up to a point that we then look at everything and say, that doesn't work anymore. Let's move from this to that. It's an overswinging of the pendulum in which we throw out the baby with the bathwater, in which we don't ask the question, what is it in the old system that actually did serve? But we kind of put it out of proportion and out of scale and out of context. So it's never quite as easy as saying, well, let's do away with all ownership. No, but let's have a more nuanced relationship about ownership. The same, it's not as, oh yeah, growth is the root of all evil. We don't want any growth. Well, without any growth, you won't eat within 6 months. So
it's the same here. Yeah. What do you think? Anna Neil said the dominion idea, man above nature, that we leave behind.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Can I ask you now to answer the following question, which is, if we have, it's also for us to help us in our building curricula, but we had an answer of that. The next question, it should be, if thriving together, if moving to regenerative culture is our goal, and I know it's a journey, so I should change that already. You made that very clear. It's a journey. What principles and ideas should we introduce in our, and you can put economic between brackets, so in our thinking, what do we need to really introduce in our way of thinking? So if you could start now, maybe we can, so the chat box, now we move to what the pluses, so the things we should do more of. And then, so I think the question is clear. So I would like, we should listen more. We should look for positive sum games, win-win-win, equity, nestedness, place connection potential. Yeah, cherishing all of life, happiness and well-being as assets, non-violence, looking for benefits for all stakeholders, carrying capacity, recognizing collapsing systems, meaningful work. And then somebody shared 8 principles.
That's just John Fullerton's 8 Principles of Regenerative Economics.
Okay, yeah. Things we should add: conversations, interdependence, the importance of the common good, collaborative abundance from YouTube.
Reinhabitation, yes. Reinhabitation.
I let you read it. Maybe there are things that stand out for you. Yeah.
Somebody picked up on the reinhabitation bit. For me, I'm beginning to think of this. There's a triad there somehow: regeneration, reinhabitation, and re-indigenization. Really remembering that we are native to this place, and that even with all the trauma and hurt that needs to be addressed and that needs to be processed of what we have done to indigenous people all around the globe, it doesn't serve to build yet another divide that somehow says we're not indigenous. It's ridiculous. We're all born to this planet, out of this planet. But in order to truly walk in right relationship again and honor that lineage, we need to re-indigenize. And that can again only happen if we re-inhabit in a regenerative way. So those 3 for me are
important. Sir Attenborough, rewilding, healing. Because actually, you're writing a second book. Can you tell us a bit about what's going to be the things you're going to add in that book, or that's still a secret?
No, to some extent, I feel like I've probably written more than a second book since I wrote the last one. Because
yeah, I know.
I would just have to, like, one project is to go back through hundreds of Medium pieces that I wrote and finding a way to structure them into a story. That would be a relatively fast way of creating another compendium that might look like a book. But what I actually feel drawn to do, but it's a tough job writing a book, because it's a huge amount of time and you never earn anything even remotely back on that time. And having a family now, it's a bit of a it's a bit self-indulgent to suddenly disappear and write a book. But I do feel that there's something about how do we engage with bioregional regeneration, and how do we turn all of this into, like, going in a much more nuanced way into what it would mean to live the questions together in a particular place, and become healers of place again. And so it's probably around bioregional regeneration that the book will be eventually, but don't hold your breath on it, because it probably will take until 2023 or something
before it's there. I see that it's 9:15 at the moment. I'm going to propose that we're going to go in breakout rooms now. I'm going to say.
I just want to say one thing. Gabriella has the coolest screen thing that I've ever seen. See that she's sitting among the grass. It's wonderful. Have you seen this? I want this. I want this.
So share that screensaver, please. I think we had a lot of input from you. Thank you for that. What we're going to do now is, if you agree, we're going to go in breakout rooms, small ones, where you have the time to talk about what you've been listening to. So there are actually 2 questions that we're going to go in breakout rooms for 20 minutes. And also the people that are following in YouTube, there will be a link also for you that you can join. And if you want to do that, join us in the breakout room. Be more than welcome. And I hope, Daniel...
Just a moment, Eddie, please. How many people are there at the moment on YouTube, Catherine? Because if there are only a few persons, they're not going to chat rooms.
36, so it should be perfectly fine.
Okay.
So we're going to put you in breakout rooms here for 20 minutes. And I think, Daniel, would you like to join as well in one of the breakout rooms? Mm-hmm. Fantastic. So for the breakout rooms, we have two questions for you to discuss. I guess you're going to introduce yourself briefly to the people that are in the chat room with you. And then what parts of Daniel's ideas really resonate with you? And then as a second question, how would you apply these ideas to your personal life and context? I think we're going to put you with 4 people. Xenia? Checking?
I'm also curious to hear what doesn't resonate at all, and where do you think this guy's completely off his rocker?
Okay, and so after these 20 minutes, we're going to ask you back in the main room, and we're going to ask one of each group, maybe not all will be able to talk, to share what resonated, what did not resonate. So with what did you not agree, and also the application for your own life and context. Okay, everybody's coming back to the main room now. Hi, Xenia.
Hi.
You did it at the same time, so yeah, we're more than 60 people back. I hope that Daniel is also joining us back.
I am, I'm here. It was wonderful. I had like the serendipity, non-coincidence engine put me together with somebody that I've needed to have a conversation with. So
yeah,
wow.
It's perfect. It's indeed serendipity. Okay, we're all back. I think Daniel was really interested in also the things that did not resonate with you, or so perhaps so the tougher questions that popped up in your small breakout rooms. So who wants to start? Who wants to share what was discussed, and perhaps with a specific question for Daniel, so that he can answer it? You can use or the chat box, but you can also talk now. So I think you can unmute yourself. I think Xenia will allow that. So
I asked the question.
Jeff, go ahead.
Okay. Daniel was talking about bioregionalism, and one of my questions is, how does he think about the idea of the peer-to-peer foundation, about cosmolocalism, the way to connect the local with the global, because we can share our
That's your question, Jeff. That's your question.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wonderful.
Peer-to-peer.
Great question. That I have a conversation. I'll put it in the chat in a second. Michelle and I had a conversation about exactly that about just before Christmas. And one of the places I met, I think the place I met Michelle first was at another R3.0 Reporting 3.0 conference that was in the Netherlands, I think in Amsterdam, 3 years ago. And James Quilligan was also there, and there's a real link between the new bioregionalists and the peer-to-peer movement, and it's not about like the big danger when we talk bioregionalism is that you can also get those elements that are kind of far right, lifeboat creating, we against the others types, like the preppers, fall into bioregional conversations. And that's not the kind of bioregionalism I'm talking about. I am talking about a cosmolocal, how do we heal our bioregion in order to be part of, like, I like the word that Mitchell Thomas Shaw coined, cosmopolitan bioregionalism, with this notion of glocal, not global, not local, but glocal, both at the same time. And yeah, the more detailed answer would be the conversation with Michelle Bowens, which I'll put in the chat in a second.
Okay, thank you for that. Can we get feedback from other rooms, things that were discussed?
I've got a suggestion or a question. Can you hear me?
Dave.
Yeah. So, Daniel, we had a discussion, and many people live in towns and urban areas. So the sense of place is of city, and you might have a garden or there might be a park. But it seems to me that bioregionalism and the sense of place you're talking about is a somewhat larger engagement with nature. So what's your recommendations for city dwellers regarding those two terms or those two phenomena?
Nice to finally meet you and have a voiced conversation with David Pendle, who have definitely recognized the name, and we've been in touch over social media for quite some time. I mean, again, that's why I think the work that Kate is doing with the Thriving Cities program is so important when it does that step of how do we reconnect our city with its hinterland again. How do we connect into local farming communities that are in our surroundings? How do we create opportunities where maybe now, particularly in England, with Brexit, you have a whole new issue of how do you actually bring enough eyes and hands per acre onto the land to do certain farming tasks that you used to deal in a more pan-European way with. And so creating opportunities for inner city dwellers to connect to their direct hinterland by opportunities to spend a weekend on a farm, of harvest chairs, community-supported agriculture, but also around the whole rewilding. And it's because rewilding isn't just about creating these places where no human must ever go, because that's just a perpetuation of the nature-culture divide, as if we shouldn't be in an ecosystem. We can be keystone species and gardeners and custodians of ecosystems. And so bringing the city back into the modern human nature back into the city and regreening the cities. Like I just recently talked to Puran Desai, who, when he set up Bedzet, the eco-village in the middle of London, part of getting the wood chips for their wood chip boiler was a project that made the whole area of Croydon in London the first Forest Stewardship Council managed FSC certified urban forest. And so it's and even there's a lot of wildlife in cities. So it's these, like, if you Google bioregionalism and Daniel Wahl and Medium, there are a whole bunch of articles, and in there one of them there's this beautiful book which what was it called, the bioregional. Anyway, in one of those articles, I summarize a question that, like, I've copied a questionnaire about how well do you know your region, and you can ask those questions as a city dweller as well. It's about, can you name 3 native species? Can you name 5 local birds? Do you know when which species migrate over you? They're all questions of re-inhabitation, of reconnecting to place and reconnecting the city to its region. And what I briefly mentioned earlier, I think we're all children of the 70s and 80s and whatever of that story where we were told America's present is our future. Well, we've seen what America just went through. Do we want to go there and have to make that mistake? Hopefully not. So, and I think a lot of it will be avoided if we reconnect the rural areas in a meaningful way with the cities again. And also now in the pandemic, I think a lot of people are trying to move back out into the country, but that creates its own problems and pressures. And so it's really finding partnerships between rural people and city people, I think, would be a way to start.
Great, thanks very much.
Daniel, there was a question from Stefano. He was wondering why you were claiming that we need economic growth, otherwise in 6 months we won't eat.
No, I didn't say we need economic growth. I said we need growth, otherwise in 6 months we won't eat. You need things to grow. Like basically if the wheat doesn't grow, if your apples don't grow, if your potatoes don't grow, then you won't eat. So it's again it's a overstatement and ramming home the fact that let's not be devil growth altogether. Let's shift from quantitative growth to qualitative growth.
Okay, thank you for that. Other groups, discussions that were taking place in other groups, of which you have certain questions now for Daniel?
If I may, yeah. we had quite multiple dimensions and discussion about regenerating soil and what would be our personal initiative to start the process. The question to Daniel is, what would be the changing authority to accelerate the change we're wishing for? Is it like, usually we have the government institution or financial institution or educational institution? How you envisioned these type of authorities to help us?
Thanks, that's a good question. And I have to comment, the backdrop is just stunning. You have a very beautiful home.
No, it's not home. It's a building in Dubai.
Okay.
But it is sustainable building. This is why I used the picture.
Okay.
I think the only one in Dubai is sustainable.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, because I think that we can't have proper bioregional regeneration take place if we don't re-regionalize our economic systems, but we also have to re-regionalize our systems of governance. And so the notion of subsidiarity, which is actually written into the European Constitution, but isn't necessarily lived in the way that Brussels runs Europe at the moment, basically says that the level of decision-making should always take place where the decisions affect the people that make the decisions. And all higher levels of government that go beyond the local and bioregion, so the national and international, should be in a subsidiary role that enables people in place to make meaningful decisions for themselves. And so
it's the participatory approach.
Pardon?
That's the participatory approach.
Yeah, it's because a lot of governments say we need to encourage more participation. People need to take more responsibility, but people will only take responsibility if they feel like their voice is being heard. And so you need to create a structure to enable that. And there are lots of wonderful new experiments of how to enable participatory governance through holacracy, sociocracy, all these different nested decision-making structures. And it doesn't mean that we can do away with some form of state authority system, because you also need to set certain enabling constraints in terms of the rule of law and those things. But it has to be in such a way that it foregrounds the participatory freedom of the people in place to make meaningful decisions that affect their lives, to my mind. And it's an important question, but it's not an easy one, how to rearrange governance in such a way that enables true participation. But one way is, of course, right now, we have so many, like coming back to the topic of economics, there are hidden subsidies in the global economic system that make things economically viable that are deeply destructive to people and planet. Like, for example, that kerosene is still not a taxed fuel, and that we still spend more than 75% of our energy subsidies towards fossil fuels and only 25% globally towards renewables. If you flip that around or just stop subsidizing fossil fuels altogether, then you would have a very different playing field. And then, of course, the need for different accounting systems that include all the externalities that force us to actually pay for the damage we do in inappropriate production systems. That's of course the role of state government and international laws. Like right now, the IMF trade rules would make it impossible. Like here on Mallorca, where I'm trying to experiment with bioregional regeneration and bioregional economics, if the local government here said, well, we're going to disincentivize people buying tinned tomatoes from China, because we can buy tinned tomatoes or we can buy fresh tomatoes from Mallorca, or we basically introduce the law to say we now want people, particularly businesses, to provision themselves primarily locally and bioregionally, and then the next circle out would be nationally, and then maybe like to basically incentivize shorter supply lines. That would be against all international trade rules. That's illegal at the moment. The IMF could sanction a government bringing in rules like that. And so there's a lot to be done to rearrange governance.
That's indeed a key topic, supply chain. But thanks. Thank you.
Daniel, there is a question which is linked to it. Do we need to change the economic system, or does it need to shift more substantially before you can really introduce regenerative practices? Is it possible within the current neoliberal / capitalistic system? Question of Hannah Temple.
Well, this is like in 2009, I was invited into this group of wise elders that realized that they were all in their 70s and 80s and that they weren't going to be around a very long time as a group if they didn't invite some more young people. And so I got lucky enough to invite it into this organization called the International Futures Forum. And one of the sort of common images that we keep coming back to is that we're challenged to redesign the plane in mid-flight. We're on a plane and it's not working and it's heading towards the mountain, but we can't land. And we have to redesign it and rebuild it in mid-flight. And that's a little bit also the conversation that I now often have with business leaders who are starting to really want to have a net positive stroke regenerative impact of saying, how do I restructure my company from the ground up that I can look into my daughter's eyes and she doesn't come back from a Fridays for Future demonstration and said, Dad, you're killing the planet. Lots of big business leaders are asking that question. But how can you create a non-zero sum company in a zero-sum playing field? It comes back to Ali's question that if we don't shift the playing field, if we don't incentivize behaviors that move towards collaborative abundance and regenerative patterns, then the best intentions of large companies is only to do a little less damage or to be a bit of a Robin Hood, to be very good at what you do and make a lot of money and then give it all away to really good projects. Like people like Doug Tompkins did with creating Esprit and then buying up large areas of South America in order to create these wonderful wilderness reserves. But it still is a little bit of making money in the degenerative economy and then doing regenerative activity. And so it is a chicken and egg question. And in this turbulent space of the second horizon, for those of you who are familiar with the Three Horizon framework, we're in this perverse situation that we have to do our best, but we also have to understand that the perfect is the enemy of the good in this transition, that we need to keep doing both at the same time, reinvent new companies that have net positive impact and regeneration in the foreground as their main purpose of being, but we need to, and that's, I guess, another huge key point that I made yesterday when Nille was on this other call a number of times, is we need to also not just come out of the silos of academic disciplines, we need to reframe our mind out of this three-sector thinking of society, of there's the business sector, there's the government sector, and there's civil society. We're all human beings. In each one of those three sectors are human beings, and they actually all play in different parts of their lives, their civil society, their business, and they might also have roles in governance. And by passing the buck between those three sectors, rather than creating conversations of how they need to work together to both shift the players and the playing field at the same time. I'm not saying it's easy, but I think we need to do it.
One last question from the audience, feedback from the sessions, and then I have a closing question.
Yes, thank you, Daniel, very much. Good to see you again. I would like to bring the heart into the conversation, and talking about indigenization and re-inhabitization. I would like to ask you, where does the heart intelligence fit into the navigation of this. So it's not just a pure rational mechanism, but it's a navigation intelligence and tool that we can use. What importance should we give the heart intelligence into our decision makings to move forward?
Thank you, Alexander. Wonderful, great. Somebody once said that we make most of our decisions with our gut or with our heart, and then we use our brain to rationalize why we made the decision. Very few decisions are actually made out of rational, analytical motives only. And I personally, if it doesn't feel right, if it gives me that sort of slightly constricted chest, or even like I sometimes feel wrong decisions in my heart muscle, or I literally feel them in my gut, in my belly, that something like it looks great, it's paying a lot of money, it's getting a lot of attention, but something doesn't feel right. And I think we all need to pay much more attention to those signals, because there's much more intelligence in us and in between us. There's this notion of animate intelligence that isn't cognitive intelligence, but is as living being that are actually nested. And that's coming back to the somewhat flimsical opening with Gregory Bateson and what is my story, like to really begin to understand that we are also beings as part of a larger whole. And by being cells in that larger body, we have access to the relational stored information in the entire system, Gaia. And we've been trained through our education system to only value thinking and the analytical mind as access to knowledge. But Jung has this beautiful mandala of saying there are 4 ways of knowing, and thinking and the analytical is only one of them. Sensing, feeling, and intuiting are the other 3. And again, bringing indigenous wisdom back in, indigenous elders know that those 3 are critically important in terms of making wise decision making. And so, thanks for asking the question. But you said bringing the heart in. I hope the heart was with us most of the time. And certainly I do my work from the heart and not from the head, even if it sounds sometimes a bit complex.
Thank you. Daniel, suppose you're a wizard and you have, like Harry Potter, a wand. What would be your wish?
What would be my wish?
Regeneratos.
Well,
new animals.
that we actually I don't know. It's this actually I'll answer in a roundabout way. I don't know if you've seen this. Recently, a friend of mine, an Argentinian filmmaker who's now gone into creating this global cooperative called El Futuro Imposible, where the im is crossed through. He picked up on a poem that I love, that I quoted at a talk that I gave in Findhorn, and invited Vandana Shiva to read this poem, and then they put it into a 90-second clip. It's called "Dear Darkening Ground" by Rainer Maria Rilke, and I'll share it in a second. I'll share it first, and then I'll tell you why I'm going there. Dear darkening ground, you have endured so patiently the walls we've built. Maybe you'll give the churches maybe you'll give the cities 1 more hour, cloisters and churches too. And those who labor, maybe you let their work grip them for another 5 hours or 7. Until that moment of inexplicable terror, when you take back your name from all things and become water and widening wilderness again. Give me just a little more time. Give me just a little more time, so I may love the things until they're real and ripe and worthy of you. So I may love the things until they're real and ripe and worthy of you. And so my answer to this question, my want is that we all fall in love with the gift of life in a deeper way again. That we all, in every moment, no matter how difficult our day is, are grateful to be alive and see that sometimes we might not change the situation we're in, but we can change our attitude and we can change our relationship to, I remember at one point I thought I had testicular cancer and I was going down a real deep hole, and I stepped on a drawing pin, and instead of saying something like a curse and saying, why did I do that? I appreciated the pain because I was glad that I was still alive to feel that pain. And I saw a dewdrop running down a blade of grass, and I burst out into tears of the beauty of that tiny little moment. And my one thing would be that if we come back to that magic, to understanding that life is a gift and that we can be a gift to each other, and that that's the path to regenerative cultures and collaborative abundance, then yes, let's fall in love with life and each other again.
Thank you. Can I ask you all to unmute and give a warm applause for Daniel Christian Wahl and for this evening.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, everybody.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sharing with you now, if you want to know more about Daniel Christian Wahl, his website is now screened for you and also designed for sustainability.medium.com. Can I also, because we're going to end here, I promised at 10 o'clock we would end this. There is also, if you are interested in these kind of talks, there is a Facebook page. We have Rethinking Economics Antwerp. There's a Facebook group. On the YouTube channel, you will find the recording of also this session. Give us some time to edit it. But so if you go to the YouTube channel and you register, you can get an update. There will be more events coming from Rethinking Economics Antwerp. Drew Brewer will probably be our next guest. The date still needs to be fixed. So we hope you had a nice evening. I hope it was worthwhile. Maybe if you're still here with me, can you share with us in one word in the chat, and we'll stop sharing now, in one word in the chat, how was this evening for you? What do you take with you? How are you feeling now after being with us, after having listened to Daniel and also the comments that were made by various people? I read inspired, grateful, nourished, full of love, invigorated, nested, grateful, alive, all of that, connected in wisdom, inspiring, great energy. Daniel, that's all for you. Really, thank you from the bottom of my heart for having been with us. We wish you all a very nice evening, and people all enjoy life and also participate to life to the maximum of your possibility.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye. Bye.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
So we will stop the recording, and we're going to ask then the people to leave the chat room, and hope to see you again very, very soon.